Okay, so one of the fun things too about RIT is that every year they upgrade their version of the software. And I can tell you from professional experience that it's probably, if you're working in a studio or working on your own, you're probably not going to upgrade your software every year, either maybe because of the expense of doing so, or just if you're in the middle of the project, the last thing you want to do is to update your software and find out that something that did work in the previous version of the software doesn't work. And then you have to figure out how to explain that one to the client. So don't want to put yourself in that situation, but um, I'm telling you this story to explain away anything that I might run into that either doesn't work, that used to work, or um, maybe new and not fully tested or fully vetted here. So let's just turn this stuff off. The Maya is the big M here. Should be on your desktop, but if it's not, you can also do a little search over here, grab the app. And here we can take a look. When you open the file, you can look at the different things that are new. I haven't had a chance to fully go through here, but I will check everything out and report back as far as if there's any useful tools or anything that's been added that's helpful. Maya has, I'm getting a little echo there. Autodesk has worked pretty hard to update some of the tools, things like the Boolean operations and some tools that used to not work so well are actually improved. And I can even see just some of the stuff that's going on here in the modeling section. They're showcasing some of the newer tools, which actually look like they work and they look pretty cool. So we'll do a rundown on those tools and try to see how we might be able to incorporate those into our assignment. But for now, I'm just going to start with a new project. And one of the things that I'm going to recommend for you is that just as a general workflow, the way RIT is structured or set up, we have a render share set up for you. And I believe we've got instructions on how to access that. But if anybody has any questions or runs into any issues with that, we'll make sure Alan and I will put our heads together and make sure you've got some clear direction on that. The render share is a separate drive that's basically not on your computer. It's offline, living over in the Magic Building, those big banks of computers, and you have space over there. For those of you that are in 1201 and you're looking at the Mac, the render share accessibility is a little bit different than it is on the PC, which is what I'm demoing on here. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but we'll make sure that you've got access to this drive. Now, what happens when you access this drive is that if you actually set up a working project on this drive, when you're working with Maya, you're in effect working on your local computer, but the information that you're working on is living somewhere else. And as a result, when you're dealing with large data sets, complicated models, things like that, it can be a little complicated to write that information to your render share. And then there's a risk when you're working virtually like that, that maybe something breaks while it's being written to the drive that's over on campus elsewhere. So what I would suggest is for you to, and we'll go through setting up a project, but when you set up a project, keep it stored on your render share. But when you sit down and start to work, consider, just see if I've got anything here that we could use. Consider copying your project over to your desktop. Looking for something small here.
I don't want to interrupt you, Craig, but they have a license server issue in the whole lab. I just got done talking with CAD Tech about it for this
Okay.
computer lab.
So the Maya's not launching?
Yes.
Okay, great. Love that. Welcome to RIT on the first day of class. Okay, what I'm demoing, everybody should be able to just sort of follow along and watch. I'm not doing anything too complicated today, so hopefully they'll be able to get that resolved while we're chatting here.
I reiterated that, yeah.
Yep. So what I've done is I've copied a folder to my desktop. During the time that I'm working in class, I would suggest you work from that folder. And then when you're all done, take that folder and drop it back on your render share to archive it. If you leave it on your computer and log off and come back the next day expecting it to be there, it may not be there. The computers often refresh overnight, so you do want to make sure you've got it backed up. Definitely do not work off of a thumb drive. You can use your thumb drive to back up your files. You can store files on the thumb drive, but do not access the thumb drive with your project that you're working on in Maya. When you write back and forth to a thumb drive, there's a great risk for corruption and error too, and I don't want any of you to lose any of your work. So if you've followed along with what I've been saying, you'll have your render share, and I'll show you how to set up a project on the render share, but you want to avoid working on the render share or working on your thumb drive, and try to remember to copy things to the desktop, do your work in class, excuse me, and then archive on your render share. And it's a good idea to also keep a drive that you can archive to as well. So let's take a look at what a Maya project looks like. If we open up Maya, the area that we will be working on first is under the file menu over here. And Maya has, just as a reference, Maya has a set of menus that are consistent: file, edit, create, select. And then directly beneath that, there's a set of specialty menus. So if I change this setting to rigging, what you'll notice is that everything to the right of the Windows menu changes up here. So since we're going to be starting in modeling, I'm just going to leave that set to modeling. But should you open Maya and not see the same thing that I'm seeing, double check and just make sure that this menu over here is set to modeling and not something else. Excuse me. All right, so before we start opening, saving, doing anything else, the first thing that you want to do when you open Maya is you want to go down to your project window. Okay. And when you do that, you'll see there's a current project. In this case, it's called default. There's a location for that project. And then there's a bunch of folders that are created. Okay. If we look at the file that I copied over here, the skull file, you can see the same folders. So we have things like assets, scenes, source images, and the important folders that are created in Maya are the scenes folder and the source images folder and then the images folder, which is where your files are rendered to. So if I go here and I say I want to create a new project. Oh, sorry. Let me be clear about that. To create a new project, you have to click over here on new. That will allow you to edit this. Excuse me. And we'll just call this temp project. You can name it obviously anything that you would like. By default, Maya is going to write to your computer on the C drive in your folder and then in documents, Maya projects. So we do want to change that. And this is where I would suggest if you're creating a new project, you add it to your desktop. And then when you're done working, you copy that to your R drive. But for now, we'll just drop this on the desktop. We gave it a name, so I'll say select. And then it's automatically going to create these folders for you. So I can just say accept. And if I go to my desktop now, I should see that I've got temp project, which was the name I gave the file. And if I double click on that, you'll see that we have these folders created. We have scenes, which will be your Maya files that you're working on. Source images is a folder that you will add any files that are used for texture mapping. You'll put them in that folder, and then Maya will know to go to that folder to look for those images. And then if and when we get to rendering, when you render something in Maya, the output will go to the images folder. Okay. The rest of the stuff you generally don't have to worry about. I will sometimes use assets to keep track of files. As an example, later in the semester, we'll get to modeling the spine, but maybe you've got a vertebrae that you've built first and you want to just keep that stored in assets so that you can utilize it in building building out the vertebrae. That would be one example of how to use the assets folder. Also, sometimes I'll use data if I'm getting like some kind of PDB data, protein data bank files for molecules or something like that. I might store them here. But generally, the rest of the stuff gets created automatically with Maya, but we really just want to focus on scenes, source images, and images. Okay. So at this point, you probably think, well, okay, awesome. I created a folder and I'm ready to go. But and this is maybe pro tip number 2 for the day. What happens occasionally with Maya, and depending on the build and the version you're working with, it may happen more or it may happen less. Maya likes to crash, especially if we get big, complicated scenes. If I've spent hours working on something and Maya crashes on me, I'm going to lose whatever data I didn't save. There are some safeguards that are built in to Maya, and one of those is a crash recovery. So you might be able to pull something back from the dead, but I don't like to count on that. So why I'm rambling on about this is that if we don't at this point set our folder, okay, Maya's still not going to know where to put anything we create. So after I've created a project, I need to then tell Maya, this is the project I want to use. So I need to go and select the temp project in this case, and we'll say set. And now if I open anything or save anything, I can see that it's going to the desktop temp project scenes folder to look for something, your previous project, anything that you've been working on, it's going to look in the scenes folder. Now, the pro tip part of this is if I've set my project and I'm working and Maya crashes, Maya is going to default when I reopen that project, it's going to default to the default project. So if I exit Maya for a moment, and then fire Maya back up before I start working, the next time Maya crashes, it's actually going to go to the temp project folder that I created instead of going back to the default folder. So why is that important? What I can tell you is that if you, every time Maya crashes, if you get into a situation where that's happening and you have to then reset the project, it's just an extra layer of things that can be a little cumbersome. So by setting the project and then quitting Maya and reopening it, you'll see that if I go to open scene now, it's opening to my temp project folder that I just created. And I won't lose that link in addition to losing any data. So it's just, for me, I've found that it's worth the extra time to set your project over here and then take a second to drop out of Maya, reopen it. And at that point, Maya will automatically default to the project that you set. So if you have to do any recovery or anything, it will save you minutes, which may not seem like a lot, but in the big scheme of trying to get things done, minutes can add up to hours and a lot of time wasted. So we've got an assignment that we need to take a look at. We're
Got Maya
going to,
back in here, Craig. Sorry to interrupt, but we got Maya back in the lab now.
awesome, great. Is everybody following along? I know that was that seemed like a little bit of a tedious start, but everybody in your end following along okay? Take that as a yes. Okay. So our first assignment that we're going to work on, and I'll use some basic examples here to just introduce you to Maya and the interface, is that we're going to create a schematic version of a vertebrae, okay? And this assignment's really designed just to introduce you to some of the modeling tools, get you comfortable with the Maya environment, and simplify these shapes so that you're not spending all of your time trying to get everything 100% accurate right now. We just want to go through some basic modeling tools to get you going, and then we'll get into the weeds as far as how to make things look photorealistic and go through those that level of detail. So here are some examples of some previous assignments, just talking about your anatomical positioning, thinking about that as you're getting ready to model and render these images. And the goal or the deliverables for this assignment, so right here, upload 2 files. There's going to be a layered Photoshop file with labels and a JPEG version of the file as well. And we'll talk about how to render the files and how to set up the environment so that you're getting the resolution that you need with these files, okay? So we're basically going to be creating a simple version of the vertebrae to get you started. So let's take a look at how we can start doing that from scratch. So I've mentioned to the grad students over here, but I just want to repeat, Maya is an amazing tool, but it's also an intimidating tool. And I think partly why that is that you can do just about anything you could imagine you'd ever want to do in Maya. But because of that, it requires a lot from you as a user to understand how to make the tools work. And oftentimes there's even more than one way to go about doing things. And that then means that things can get complicated because you might see somebody do something one way and then see somebody else do something another way. So What I'm going to try to do is really try to streamline this process to the best of my ability from the years of working with Maya, which for me goes back to the early 90s when it was a product called Alias. Um, and hopefully pass along some tips to sort of expedite your learning process. So the first thing you'll notice here when we're looking at the Maya interface, I did point out the menus up here. This first set of menus, file, edit, create, select, modify, all the way up to Windows. Those are going to be consistent no matter what the interface is. And there'll be different things that we access there. Over here to the left, you'll see that there's some selection tools up here, and then the move tool, rotate tool, and scale tool, okay? Those are also accessible on your keyboard. And you'll find that as I'm teaching, I tend to minimize the keyboard shortcuts that I use because I want you to understand where things are in the menus so that you can always find things. And then as you get more comfortable with Maya, I'll encourage you to use some of the shortcuts. But in the case of working with Maya, the W key, W as in World Wide Web, the E key, and the R key, you can see how as I press those keys, I'm toggling between move, rotate, and scale. So W, E, and R, those three keys are going to be your friend. And it's a good idea as you're experimenting with modeling, learning to use those keys to change the manipulator for your model. Those are going to be helpful shortcuts for you. Okay. So we've got selection tools and translational tools here. And then we have our interface tools here. So I've got my 3D layout here. And then if I click on this window, I have my orthographic layouts, and it should say top, front, and side. Now, this is something, I'm going to point this out here. A couple of years ago, Maya introduced the ability for you to change these views, and you can use this tool over here to flip around. And so you might be looking at a top view, but if you rotate that view, now you're looking at the front view, but it still says top here. This can get a little confusing. I find just because as a bit of a traditionalist, I tend not to mess around with these tools too much because it actually can get you disoriented and make it a little bit harder to understand where you are and what you're looking at in your scene. So my recommendation is to kind of shy away from or stay away from these tools that are changing the view. Get comfortable working in this orthographic setup, and if you use the space bar, if I press the space bar in this window, you can see that I'm toggling between my zoomed in 3D view and my orthographic views here. If I want to bring the top view full screen, I can press the space bar over that window. And again, that toggles between the orthographic view and your zoomed in views in that particular window. For me, I find it's just easier to keep track of if I'm staying in these views and just using the shift key to zoom in and out, depending on what window I'm hovering over. As I press the shift key too, you probably notice that there's something else that pops up here. This is called the marking menu. And it was something that was designed probably back in the mid to late 90s. The idea here is that if you are trying to recall a menu, instead of if I'm working over here, instead of going up here and trying to pull a menu down, if I can press the space bar, all of my menu items, and you notice here, this top menu is the modeling menu. This next line is the rigging menu. And then I have my animation menu, my FX menu, and so on. So it actually calls or summons all of the menus at your mouse pointer, and you don't have to leave the field that you're working in to go up and grab something and bring it back down. I personally have found that if I'm working in a production environment, that utilizing the marking menu can be really helpful. You may see me do that once in a while, but in general, I'm going to not do that as much because I do want you to understand where menu items are located initially. As you get more comfortable working in Maya, you might find that you want to play around with this. And one of the most interesting things about the marking menu is that they've actually designed this to where you can make a gesture or move the mouse in a particular way. You can see here, if I pop my left button mouse down here too, I can actually, in this case, if I'm hovered over the center dot, I can actually change my views here. And if you do this a lot, you can actually make the gesture and Maya will understand what you're trying to do. And you can actually get really efficient and really fast just by, pressing the space bar and doing a quick left, right toggle, something like that. I find that if you're at that level, I mean, you're probably somebody that's in a really high pressure production environment. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's a way for Maya to sort of speed that particular task up. But for the most part, I don't expect that you as students are really going to get to a level where you're utilizing the gesture marking menu. You might find though that this is something that's valuable and helps you be a little more efficient in your process. So just by holding the space key down again, we'll bring the marking menu up. All right, so enough babbling. Let's talk about some ways that we can get started modeling something. So um, one of the trickiest things I think when you're faced with getting started is understanding that a cube in Maya is can be the most important beginning structure when you're modeling, because a cube actually can become a sphere. And if I'm going to start modeling anything, generally speaking, I'm going to look at starting with a cube. So how we get to that is we look at create polyprimitives and polygons. I'll go through NURB surfaces too, because there are times that we can utilize those tools. But for the most part, we're going to start by creating some polygons. I'm not going to quiz you on what a polygon is, but basically that's the most basic surface shape that's created. And we'll get into the details of polygons and how they're structured and what U and V orientation is. We'll get into all that when we start getting into texture mapping. But for now, I'm going to go over here to the cube. So I've got create polyprimitives in cube. And you'll notice in Maya that there are these little, generally these little boxes that are associated with most of the menu items. These are the options that are available to you. So if when you're first getting started, you might want to select the option box and just take a look at what the settings are. You'll notice in this case, a default cube is set to a width of 1, a height of 1, and a depth of 1. And then there's divisions. So this means there's no divisions on any of the faces. We're just going to get a 1-to-1-to-1 cube. The orientation is set to Y. And the UVs, in this case, will be created automatically for us. So if I hit apply, I'm creating a cube. It's at a scale of 1 unit. And we'll get into how to set the units and everything too as we move along. We don't need to dive too deep into that for the initial assignment, but we will talk about that when we move on to the next assignments. So I've created a cube in my space, and you can see over here in this outliner tool, you can see that the cube exists now. If I want to select it, I can select it here. Click to deselect it. Click again over the object to select it. You can see that I've got a locator tool here. And remember, I mentioned the W, E, and R key. So W allows or selects the move tool. So I've got a set of arrows now. And if I hover over those arrows, I can move my object by left mouse clicking on the object. So I can move in an individual axis. Let me point out too that I'm undoing my motions or actions by hitting the Z key. So if I move something and decide I don't like that, I can hit Z. It's not the same as Command Z for Photoshop, but just pressing the Z key will undo any previous motion. And actually, there is history on that too, so I can undo multiple translations or any actions that you've applied to your object. So W, move, E, rotates. And if you look at the manipulator tool, you'll notice that as I hover over, what you'll see is as red, hopefully you'll see this as red, green, and blue if you're not colorblind. And if anybody is colorblind, please let me know too. I know that can be a particular challenge, and I'm happy to talk to you about that and hopefully make accommodations if needed. But if I want to rotate this cube in a particular axis, I can hover over that axis and then select with my left mouse button, and you can see that I'm rotating in just that axis. In this case, if I look down here in the lower left, it's a little hard to see, but you can see that there's a Y, which is up and represented by green. There's an X-axis that is going off to my right, and a Z-axis that's going off to my left. So that helps me give me a little visual cue that, oh, if I'm grabbing the blue here and rotating it, I'm actually rotating in Z. And you might also notice too, if I do that, that there are some numbers over here that are changing. My basic translation, rotation, and scale values for this object are also recorded over here. So if I need to be precise, like I need to rotate something exactly 70 degrees, I can type that number in and it will be exactly 70 degrees. Set this back to 0. So this is a way for you to be precise with your modeling. You can type in the translation, rotation, and scale values over here. There's also another sort of hidden menu, and this is something that is one of those things that gets a little confusing with Maya. But when you do create things in Maya initially, they're going to have something called history. And that's basically just recording the most basic information about the object you're creating. So you can see here, when we created the cube, let me just go back and create another one. You'll remember that the option box gave us width, height, depth, and divisions. You can see that information over here too. So if I were to take this object and change the number of divisions here, I've all of a sudden changed the number of divisions on that surface. So it's it's a recorded history for the time being. And if we manipulate this again further, there'll be some additional history information that's recorded. We'll have a long conversation about history and when it's appropriate to delete history. That will all come up, but for now, you don't have to worry about it in the initial assignment. So I'm not going to go in depth there. I mentioned though that we're going to use a cube to create a sphere, right? And I'm sure you're wondering how that works. a couple additional shortcut keys that can be useful in Maya is that the 1, 2, and 3 key. So numerical key 1, 2. Okay, and you see when I press 1, I'm seeing all of the polygons as they're defined mathematically and sharply. When I press 2, I see that Maya has basically taken all of those polygons and averaged the surfaces together to create a sphere. Okay. And these points, the vertices, okay, which are basically an intersection of points, correspond to the base polygon level. Okay, so if I move this, and again, I just hit the W key to move it. If I move this in any direction and press the 2 key, you can see now that that vertex is actually influencing this averaged surface. Okay, and I'm going to just undo a couple levels here, back to this. So we're toggling between the raw polygonal information and an inherited surface that's made up of an average of those polygons. And the 3 key, so 1, 2, 3, 3 just hides those polygons so that you can focus on the surface. Okay, but you can see that I still have my vertex selected here, and you can see that it's also influencing the surface in this way. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? That might be one of those things that's a little bit of a noodle baker at the beginning of the semester. So if not, let's take a look at what we can do to modify this shape further. Let me go over a couple additional shortcut keys too that can be helpful. Your shading. Okay, there's within the viewport, which is defined as this area that we're looking at here as I'm tracing around. There are a couple menus within that influence not only what you're looking at or what camera you're using, but also how you're looking at things. So if I want to see the wireframe model of my structure, okay, I can hit 4. If I want to see the shaded version, I can hit the number 5. If I hit 6, and this is nice because it's actually, as I hit these keys, you can kind of see a little descriptor up here. Okay, these same options are available in the shading menu up here. So if I go to shading wireframe, you can see just the wireframe of the object. If I say shading smooth shade all, I'll see the object shaded. And one of the things that I actually find can be helpful is wireframe on shaded. Okay, there's a shortcut key here, but I'll usually just pick that. What that means is that if I've got nothing selected and look at the object, you can see that the viewport is drawing the lines of the polygons on the surface of the object. Personally, as I'm modeling some things, I find that to be helpful. So sometimes I'll put that on, but you can toggle that on and off here. The other mode that sometimes is useful is something called the X-ray mode. What that basically does is just takes the shaded mode of your object and allows you to see through it so you can see the front and the back. Again, you can toggle those on and off here, but 4, 5, 6, 7 actually shows you the scene with the lights. And of course, we don't have any lights in here right now, so we're seeing the surface rendered black. But if I did have lights in the scene, you could get a sense of how the scene lighting is taking place just by toggling 7. So 1 shows the full raw polygon base. 2 and 3 will show the averaged surface that's derived from that polygon. 4 is wireframe, 5 shows the shaded view, 6 shows shading with textures, which we don't have any textures on here yet, and 7 shows the scene with the surface, textures, and lighting. So those are the most useful 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are the most useful shortcut keys, along with W for moving, E for rotating, and R for scale. Okay. And again, as a reminder, any of those manipulations you do are numerically represented over here. So if you need to change something back, you can modify that numerically. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for me so far? Alan, everybody's good over there?
Yep, I think so. I just
Great.
walked around, seemed everyone was good.
Okay. So we have a task now to create something that's going to look like a vertebrae, something that's schematic. And we're going to talk about how to visualize that and model that using the principle of a cube as a sphere. Okay. So let's look at, maybe start simply with the vertebral body, which is sort of an oblong oval shape. So what can we do to create that shape? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a cube. And again, I'll get into more detail too as we work through things as far as the philosophy behind this and why this is beneficial. But if I take a look at my cube right now and I smooth that by hitting the 3, so this is the surface representation, I've got a perfect sphere, but that doesn't look like the body of the vertebrae. So what do we need to do here? Well, we probably could scale this up a little bit. So I can scale that by hitting the R key. So again, W, move, E, rotate, R, scale. I can click over the yellow box and left mouse drag, and that will change the whole scale. Okay. Or I could, if I want to make this a little bit longer, maybe to represent the shape of the body of the vertebrae, I can change in any of my axes. For now, though, I just want to keep this a cube. So I'll go back and edit my numerical values for scale so that everything is set evenly. Now, one of the things that's most helpful when you're modeling too is being able to tumble around your object. All I'm doing is holding the Alt key, which is, and trying to think on the Mac keyboard, I think it's the same key. It would be the key next to the space bar. And with that key down, I'm dragging my left mouse button. I can do that anywhere in the scene. Okay. But if I get a little too crazy with this and lose track of where I am, okay, there are a couple orientation cues that I can look at. One of them is I can look in the lower left here and I see that my Y axis, even though it's small, is pointing up. So I do know that I'm looking at the Y axis in the up position. I also do have this little cubey thing over here that tells me that this is the top. But if I get turned upside down, I look here, I can see that Y is now pointing down and I'm seeing the back of the model. If I'm not sure where I am still, I can always go back under the view menu that's inside of the viewport window. And I can go to default view, and that will reset the camera to the original view that it was set at when you open Maya. So if you get lost, you can go to view, default view, and return to your original location. Some other things that can be helpful, zooming in and out. Okay, I'm using the middle mouse wheel. Okay, sometimes you'll find if you sit down at a computer, that may not work or it may not work as well. If that happens, like maybe it's zooming too fast or too slow, just let us know and we can help you get that dialed in so that that works. If you have a 3-button mouse and don't have the trackball, you can generally push down on the middle mouse. Oh, this is it's one of those things. Excuse me. Change the tool. Usually you can push down on the middle mouse and drag left or right, and that will allow you to zoom in and out. But this particular mouse is not cooperating with me right now. So, Alt key left mouse will roll you around. Alt key middle mouse will allow you to pan, and I'm actually pushing the trackball wheel down. Excuse me. I have to get some water in a second. We'll take a break in just a moment here. And I've been prattling on for quite a while here. So, all right. So let's focus on getting the shape correct. Okay. So we've seen that I can take this cube, I can smooth that, but we're smoothing everything, and so it looks like a sphere. So in order for us to get something that maybe is going to represent the shape of the body of the vertebrae, we need to make some changes to this. And we can do that in one of two ways. If I'm looking with the red in the X orientation, one of the things I could do is I could increase the subdivisions in the, let's see, that's our depth. So we actually just want to go in the width. So if I change, maybe I do want depth here. And you'll find that sometimes, even the most experienced users, sometimes there's a little bit of trial and error. I'll try something and then decide I don't like that and maybe change my mind. That just comes with experience. So I can add some subdivisions to this object. I could scale this out a little bit here too. And if I change to my smooth setting, all of a sudden it looks something that's more akin to maybe a pill as opposed to a sphere. Okay. If you find that it's helpful, sometimes as you're learning, using the 2 key will show you both the raw polygon and the surface. Maybe that's a little easier for you to visualize or keep track of. I tend to look at things without that, so I'll usually toggle between 1 and 3 so I can understand where the surface is. Excuse me, and an additional tip is that I usually try to do all of my modeling in the raw mode and then check it to see how it's looking on the surface. And the reason for that is if I grab a vertex here and manipulate that vertex, I can pretty clearly see what's happening to the shape. And I can see the results of what that manipulation gave me by toggling between these 2 surfaces. But sometimes if I'm trying to model or manipulate the surface and I'm not looking at the raw shape, okay, you can see how there's no correlation to what's going on. And what I might end up with is if I like pull this in a weird way where I'm not really sure what's going on, it's very easy to lose track of what's actually happening on the surface. And you can see here, this just is not a shape that's going to be cooperative or render well or allow you to manipulate it easily, because we've folded the surfaces back on themselves. So by trying to do that modeling in the soft display mode, it's hard for me to understand what's actually influencing the surface. Whereas if I keep my modeling active in the raw polygon mode, it's much easier for me to keep track of the overall shape, and then I can look and see what the influence of that shape is giving me. Another nice thing about working in the raw mode is that you can actually utilize the grid snapping component. If you make a mess of your base surface here and you don't know how to get this. Yes. Okay, excellent. So just grabbing the vertex, thank you for asking that. Let's talk about two modes that are really important when you're modeling in Maya. The first is there's an object level mode, and I can access that. This is one of the times that I will use that shortcut marking menu. If I hit over or I'm hovering over the object and I right click, this object mode option will come up. And if I move the mouse over and select that, you'll see that the object itself turned green, highlighted green. And that tells me that I'm at the level of the object, okay? This is probably one of the hardest things to understand about Maya, but once you do understand it and you start to think about this from an animation component, and this is actually true for all of the 3D software programs, whether it's Cinema 4D, Maya, Blender, there's going to always be some sort of overarching object level when you create something in 3D space. And when I manipulate the object, I'm moving the whole object, okay? When I want to select a vertex or a face or anything else that's below the object level, that's what's referred to in Maya as a component, okay? So a component is anything that's below the object level. It can be an edge, a vertex, a face, any of these structures. And the simplest way to change between the object mode and the component mode is to right click over the object and say, I want to pick the vertices, okay? When that happens, you can see the lines became blue. And if I hover or move my mouse around over the vertexes now, you'll see that they kind of highlight red. And if I just click on one of those with the left mouse button, now I can use my manipulator tool to move that vertex. And obviously, as a single vertex is selected, it doesn't make much sense to rotate that because it's not really going to do anything. But if I had two vertexes selected and I'm holding the shift key down to pick the second one, you can see that I can rotate between those vertices or even scale between those vertices. Okay. So vertexes, bases, those are components. Those are things that live below the main object level, and those allow you to fine-tune your object surface. Now, I've made a mess out of what started as a pretty easy to work on rectangle. So I need to clean this up and figure out a way to bring this back to a shape that we can work on. And this is partly why I have adapted this process for modeling, is that you can, if you can start with simple shapes, you can keep track of those shapes. You can clean them up if they become a mess. And you can do that by utilizing the grid that you're looking at and snapping components, which are again, your vertexes, your edges, your faces. You can snap those components to the grid and return your shape to something that's reasonable to work on. So the way we're going to do this is I'm in my component mode here. I'm picking vertices. If I'm looking at my top view, and I can toggle the wireframe for a second to double check that. I just drew a box around these vertices here. And if we look at what I've selected, you can see that I've selected this end unit here. Now, I want to utilize a tool called Grid Snap. But if I do this right now, this is a weird thing that Maya doesn't default this to snapping to the grid and changing the spacing of the vertices. I still don't understand why they don't set that as the default, but they don't. So what I want to do is go under the modify menu over here. I want to go to my move tool option box. Okay. And I'm going to look at the options here, and there's one setting called retain component spacing that by default is checked on. I'm going to turn that off. And the way you utilize Grid Snap is by pressing the X key. That's X is an X-ray. You can see when I do that, this little locator or this little box in the manipulator changes to a circle. Okay, that's a cue, visual cue telling me that I'm utilizing Grid Snap now. And in my orthographic view from the top, I'm going to pull the manipulator, and you can see I've snapped those components now to the grid, which means that they're lined up with each other. Okay. And by doing that now, I've aligned everything on the grid for this first set of vertices. I'm going to go ahead and do that with these other ones as well. So again, I'm holding X down. You can see that square change to a circle. I'm going to snap those components. These look like they're in alignment, so I'm not going to worry about those. But now we've got our other orthographic views that we can address. So I'll grab those, snap those to the grid. I'm going to snap these guys to the grid, and lo and behold, I've returned that messed up shape to something that's very much closer to what I had originally. Everything is lined up and clean, and the only thing left to do is maybe make sure that these are all even. So I'll grab the end pieces here, these pieces, and now we've evenly balanced out our components, and we're back to a rectangle that if we smooth, again, goes back to that pill shape. Okay. Learning how to return things to something that you can work with is a skill that you'll develop as we move forward. I'm noticing here that these are not even, so let's just make sure those are snapped as well. And using the Grid Snap tool is a great way to sort of balance everything out. Now, we need to further divide this shape so that we can make it look less like a pill and more like a vertebral body. If I were to add a division across the top of this and the bottom of this, that will help us to make the shape a little more like the vertebral body. So what I can do here is we're going to use a tool that's under the mesh tool menu, and it's called Insert Edge Loop. Okay. And an edge loop is basically if you follow a set of edges and it goes all the way around the circumference of something, that's an edge loop. It's looped all the way around. So if I say insert edge loop and I click on this leading edge that's facing me, you can see that it's with the left mouse button held down, I'm dragging. And this is telling me where the edge loop is going to be created or inserted. So if I let go there, I've now inserted an edge loop. And if we look at the profile of this now, you can see how that edge loop has influenced our shape and given us kind of a flat top to this. If I do, the edge loop tool shows up over here beneath my manipulators, and I can tell that it's selected already because the arrow is a little different than it typically is. So I'm going to click down here, add another edge loop, and now I'll go back to select my manipulator, which will end the edge loop function. You know, guys, I apologize. Can you guys see what I'm doing? Okay. I realized I didn't put the screens on up here. I'm sorry about that. I'll fix that in a moment. But as long as you can see and follow along. So now I've added 2 edge loops to this. And if I go into my smooth mode, you can see now that we've got something that has a much more, at least in the y-axis, has a much closer profile to the vertebral body. Okay. If I want to now change the shape of this further, okay, I can go to my vertices. I'm right clicking here, selecting vertex, grabbing these 2 vertices. And when I say grabbing these 2, I'm grabbing, and this is actually a good point about working in orthographic views. When I actually mouse over and draw a box around the vertices here, you can see that I'm actually selecting all of the vertices that are in the orthographic range. So if I just select those and pull those out a little bit, okay, and then we toggle and take a look at what we're doing, wow, that's looking a lot closer to a vertebral body. And I would say that we probably can take this set here and pull those in a little bit. And now we're getting much closer, okay? This is probably good enough for the vertebral body assignment or the schematic assignment. If you wanted to say maybe pull these ends out a little bit more too, you could add another edge loop in here, and that tool is still available to us over here. But again, to remind you, mesh tools, insert edge loop. And if I click here, now you'll see that we've added an edge loop in the middle. It's taking on the shape of what we've, of the way we've distorted this object, because we've done these manipulations. So now it's trying to kind of evenly fill in that loop. But now we can take, if I grab in my orthographic view from the top, if I grab those 2 vertices on each side here, you can see I've grabbed actually 4 on each part. And if I use my scale tool here and just scale in the Z axis, I can actually move those away from each other a little bit. And if I look at the shape now, you can see that I'm getting something that's much closer to the vertebral body. And from here, you can, move along and just work on this to make it your own. It's by working in the orthographic view, something that is handy is that you can use the scale tool in relation when you've got vertices that are spaced apart. You can use those to kind of tease things out a little bit, and you're basically moving these off in one direction and this set of vertices off in another direction until you get the thickness the way you want it. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yes. Okay, no, that's great. Let's go back and look at that. So let's. So what I'm doing right now, I'm just returning this to something that was more of the original rectangle. And again, you can see by utilizing grid snap, it's pretty easy to go back to that basic shape. The more simplistic you can keep your base models, the more you're going to be able to rely on the snapping method, and the easier it will be for you to then manipulate things. So if I look at this shape now, I want to pull what would be the anterior front of this out a little bit, and we want to kind of pooch in the posterior aspect of this, and I'm looking at anterior being to my left in the x-axis and posterior to my right. If I want to add a curve, what I can do is I'll right click over the top of the object. I'll choose vertices. And because I'm looking at this from the top in my anterior view, or I'm sorry, I'm looking at the top down. If I select these vertices here, you can see that I've actually selected the entire set of vertices that make up the face of that, right? All I have to do now is move that to pull that out, and you can see that now I'm bending the front part of that out, and that's given me the ability to kind of pooch that. Now I will, if I've selected something in my raw polygon mode, I've selected something here, and I know I know exactly which vertices I've got selected. I'll start by pulling those out, but I may shift to my smooth mode to fine tune things a little bit. But I'm aware of what I've excuse me, got selected, and I will I know that I'm not messing up the base polygon if I'm just moving these in one axis. Okay. And then I can do the same thing. If I go back to my raw polygon, I can grab in the orthographic view, I can grab that whole set of vertices here that will influence the posterior face. And again, if I pick these end pieces, I can use the scale tool, averaging between them to sort of push that out a little bit until I get the shape that I'm happy with. Yes, absolutely. Does anybody else have any additional questions? Oops. Stop there. Okay, so we've created a shape. Now what do we do with it, right? We need to save this so that we can recall it. How's it going? Good. Everybody doing all right over there? Yeah, great. Good. Okay, so we're ready to save this. So we can go under File, Save Scene. And if I just click on that, it's going to pop up. I do want to check here and just make sure it's going where I expect it to go. And when we set up our project at the beginning, and I'll go back through that again too, just so that we can have that recall. But I'm looking to see that this is going to desktop and it's going to my project folder. So I need to give the scene a name. So something like maybe base schematic vertebrae. I'll just abbreviate that. Um, One of the tips that I can suggest as you move along, and this is something that I developed just in my practice in my studio, was that I found it's really important to come up with a name that's something that you would be able to search for and recall. So at least having something like vertebrae, something that would trigger your memory. So you guys are sharp and you're paying attention and you know what you're doing and you can recall things quickly. When you get to be my age, it's like, where was that file from 20 years ago and how do I find it and that sort of thing. So using a naming convention that includes some descriptor of what you might be looking for 20 years from now is a good habit to get into. And then I found, because I would often end up with multiple versions of scenes, especially as you move along with your animation, what I would do is I would use a numerical indicator, and this was for me just telling me that I was in the first version of what I was working on. So version 1, I would use that, and then I would use a secondary marker to describe the version in an ABCD format. So if I had version A, I would know that that's the one I started with. If I moved along and made some major changes, I would maybe indicate that it was version B. And the reason for doing that is that if I need to change between A and B or B and C, I'm only editing one letter when I save something. So in this case, if I say schematic vertebrae 1A, then I know personally that this is the version 1 of this. This is also the A version, so it's the first version alphabetically. And I have had projects where I've, gone on beyond Z as far as the number of iterations and things that I've had to do to particular projects. So sometimes, if you're either working with a fussy client or you just have something that's very complicated and you have to make versions and save them along the way, you may end up with more than A, B, C, D, but usually I would end up with most of these things being A, B, C, D, E, F, maybe G, and not too much beyond that, hopefully. So that aside, choose your naming convention here. There's no right or wrong, but if you can come up with a system that works for you, that helps you immediately identify not only an object in a search, but also what iteration of it is for you, you'll find that your life will be easier if you're trying to find things. So I've given this a name. I'm going to save the file. And if I now say create a new scene and I want to recall that vertebrae, I can go to open scene and it by default goes to my scenes folder so I can see that my vertebrae is located there. Okay. Now, if we want to say create a new project, we could go back to our project window. This is going back to how you set all this up. I can create a new project by clicking here and we'll just say, and I'm just calling this temp for my own for my own clarification so that I know that I can dump this later, but you would want to name it something that makes sense. We'll call this temp vert B, and this is again going to the desktop. So I'm going to say accept. And if I now go to set project, you can see that I've got temp project, I've got temp vert B, which is the one we just created. If I select that and say set, if I go to open scene, because I set the project to temp vert B, there's nothing there because we saved the other project to temp project. So I have to go into temp project scenes to grab that. Now I can recall that. And if I want to save this now, I need to return to the new project that I created and save it in the scenes there. And now if I say open scene, I can find that in the secondary project folder. Does that make sense?
Folder part again?
Yes.
please?
Yes, absolutely. So we want to create a project in Maya, and we want that to live in a particular folder. I'm going to say file. I'm going to project window. Okay. What this is bringing up is basically a templated structure that Maya likes to use in order to access not only the scene files, but also any other artwork that would be associated with the particular project. Okay. So it's going to create these default folders, but I need to give it a new name. So I'm going to say new project. And then I'm going to say temp this root C. And I want to check the location, make sure it's going to my desktop in this case. You can send the project to your R drive, but again, the problem in doing that is that you're trying to recall something across a network, and that creates the danger of something being corrupted if everything doesn't write properly and quickly. So that's why I'm encouraging you to work off of your desktop first, and then make sure you archive things on your R drive. So once we have the project name and location, we can say accept. And now if I go to my set project window, you can see that I've got multiple projects here now. And if I set this one and say open, it's going to take me to my scenes folder in that particular project, but there's nothing there yet because I haven't saved anything there. Does that make sense? Great. Yeah, and don't, this seems like a really mundane detail, but it's one of the most important things as you're developing your workflow, that you're able to keep track of where things are, where you're saving things, and how you're accessing things. Don't be afraid if you still get tripped up with this to keep asking questions, okay? Yep. All right, I think I've dumped enough on you for the first day. Probably a good time to stop and just give you a chance to experiment and